So it's 5 o'clock. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Education Operations Committee of the Whole of the Wausau School District. I'd like to read the following statement. During this meeting, board members will, in many cases, be hearing information presented to them for the first time. Their responses will, in many cases, be extemporaneous and should not be considered either their final opinion on a matter, nor should any opinion expressed by an individual board member during any meeting be considered the opinion of the board as a whole unless it is presented by the presiding officer as such. And that will only happen after we've had conversation and reached consensus. Look for a motion to approve the minutes of June 25th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Any questions? Hearing none, I'll move it to a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Bob, you have the legal expense summary for 2017-2018.
Yes, it is only a written. This one happens to be the final one for 17-18. Came in at about $45,000 total, which is nicely done, interim superintendent, half of our budget. So, legal expenses are difficult to predict in some cases, but in this year's case, we wrapped up a lot of our Phase 3 energy efficiency work. We weren't doing a referendum. Some of those things, we were a little bit more efficient with our negotiations this year, so all of those things together. And the other ones that are unpredictable just didn't come up this year. Reason or another. So that's the final report. It summarizes all 4 quarters. 45,000, I think, is the number. So no action needed, just a written report you see quarterly from me.
Great. Any questions?
Thank you to Cassie too. She's the one that helps assemble that report.
That goes without saying for everything we do.
I have a question, comment, concern as it relates to this in the next agenda item. So going to the district policy 9305, there shall be an annual review of all legal counsel used by the board. Between this document and then the next document, I don't really feel like that is sufficient to qualify as a review. Just looking at this, it would be nice to see a summary of the specific requests that have been made and then what the firm did in that request. This is just, it's only 2 pages and I just personally don't feel comfortable calling this a review.
From my perspective, this is something the board asked for about 4 years ago. And we never provided, not the next agenda item, but the current agenda item, the legal expense summary. And it was something the board asked, how long would it take to put this together? And I said, probably a little bit to establish the report. Once we establish the report, we pull our skyward costs, and we talked about how much of the detail we wouldn't be able to share in public, in open session at least. But we can do whatever the board wants. We can.
That would be my concern too, that there would be stuff that you could get more detailed, but then there'd be things that were confidential that would be shared in public.
So this actually was in the first step, because you're right, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, and it was after the whole Christmas music fiasco when the legal expense went over $100,000 for, I think it was Boardman and Clark was the one, and there was really no, prior to that there was limited reporting, I guess, available or provided to the board. And I think I was the one that asked for this actually, to get it and to review it, and then to approve these going forward. But to your point, again, that was an iterative approach. That was a start a number of years ago. We hadn't discussed at that point in time digging into, as you're suggesting, digging into any of these, but
Well, my concern is just the language of the board policy says it's an annual review. Mm-hmm. And I just don't feel like this will qualify as a review between this document and the next document. And I do understand the confidentiality concerns, but this is related to the board. I mean, if we have to review some things confidentially to meet this policy, I don't think that's a problem. And I understand time commitment, but when I look at this doesn't tell me a whole lot. You know, we have all these different firms that are listed. They could be all over the map on their hourly rate on who's doing the work there. Is it a partner? Is it a first-year associate? Is it primarily a paralegal? And what are they being requested to do? Contract review, for instance, regarding what? And what was the outcome? Something, it doesn't have to be very detailed, but certainly a bit more than this. That's, I
When you
mean,
look
that's
at
what
it-
I think a review would be.
When you put it in that perspective, I think about it from like almost like a vendor management standpoint, and from that lens, you're right. I wouldn't think in parallels to this, I would not consider this a thorough review in my day job, if that were.
Maybe we need to change the
Vendors.
policy.
Well, and that's
Because what
Call
you
something
just
else then.
described is really something that would be done by the folks that are actually using the attorneys or using the, you know, or Larry for what he's using for any of his services for buildings and grounds. I mean, we don't sit down and decide, you know, how much was this one per hour? You know, did you like that
Swear
food
mine.
vendor? Did you like this vendor? Did you like that one?
And if that
I mean,
needs
how
to,
could we?
and if that needs
really?
to be the case, then fine. But I just don't feel comfortable saying I reviewed this, and that's the language of the policy as it currently stands.
Right, in every area of our operations, we find ourselves in the same conundrum, right? That we have to rely on the administrative staff that we hired to be able to make these kinds of judgments. To go into enough detail on this case, for instance, would require us to know an awful lot more than any of us, well, maybe except for the two of you know coming into the process. And again, that information would be coming from the same people whose judgment at present we're trusting to do that review themselves. So that gets to us back to Lance's question. You know, how much of a review would we have to be able to do to call it a sufficient review? And would that be worth
To me,
our
but
time and
there's some
effort
good
anyway?
questions. Do we know, do the people who are contracting with him on the administration, do you guys look at, can you tell us which ones, what the rates are, and who is doing the work, and
Yep. We get a detailed invoice. Some are better than others, depending on the law firm. And increments of 10 minutes, 15 minutes, pretty small increments, I know. And just signed off on one for $75 for 15 minutes, for example. But we get detailed bills. Probably Superintendent Hiltz, myself, and HR Director Schwei are probably the only ones that see these on a regular basis. The rest of the team, there'll be some legal expenses they incur, but not without consultation first. So the three of us usually sign off on them. But the bills themselves are pretty detailed. You see in the audit of the bills that we just conducted the actual amounts for each one of them, but that's no less or more than what you see here. It's just summarized. But you see dollar amounts. Trying to think what's in between a detailed invoice and this. There's something in between there that you want, I would imagine.
Well, my concern here is if we're, again, going back to the word review, these columns don't tell us a whole lot about it. We contacted this firm for their services for this inquiry. This was the result. That, to me, if I can read something like that, is a review.
That would be huge, though. I mean, it would be.
Which I understand.
I mean,
and
if we're talking the special ed department is making multiple phone calls on, I need something on this, I need something on this, I need something. I mean, it would be big. These aren't like, it isn't like a $10,000 bill for one thing. It's like a $10,000 bill for 100 things.
Sure. I mean,
So-
do you think that this is a review though? When you look at this one
No, I think it's an
page sheet?
approval. No, the one-page sheet you're referring to the legal expenses.
Mm-hmm.
No, that isn't. I mean, that's basically there because we asked that we just wanted to keep up to date with it quarterly, so that we could keep an eye on what our expenses were along the way. That wasn't meant to be an evaluation of the law firms
So you
themselves.
see it,
So
if
if
you
there's
see
a
a huge
huge,
spike,
yeah, we can ask.
We can ask questions like, "Hey, why is this? You know, what's this big thing for? Are we out of? You know, it seems like we're out of whack compared to prior years. You know, in our second quarter."
So, Tricia, are you thinking more of an explanation for why we go to certain firms for certain kinds of work?
I'm simply saying that between this and then the next list, which is just a list of firms
Right.
and the specific practice areas, that to me does not qualify as a review. If you want me to approve a list, that's different, but it's not a review of,
Okay.
it's just
you
the
just
language
need
that's
to
in the
change the
policy.
language and call it an annual approval, or?
Well, and that's what the motion is. It's to approve the attached lists. We're basically allowing administration to make use of these law firms.
But that's not what the policy says in number 1. Annual review of all legal counsel used. I
Hmm.
just,
Maybe we need to bring that to PRL and take a look at that language of review, because if we're thinking of that as like a full review, then I agree. We certainly don't do that any more than we do for
sure.
all the other things that administration
Can you give me
accesses
the
for money.
policy number again, Tricia?
It's 9305, it's number 1.
All right.
I feel compelled to say what happened 5 years ago when we did start this, that we brought it to the board because the board told me what they wanted. They said, summarize by category. I said, what do you think about these categories? I said, that looks good. What do we think about these law firms? You can't really add to that. The law firms are the law firms. Is this a document you feel would be useful? And unanimously, it was, yes, this is going to be useful because legal expenses are kind of the barometer for how things are going, at least at the time. That was the feeling. And I said, now, mind you, we have a lot of expenses that are way bigger than the legal expenses. Electric and gas and contractor and a lot of other ones that we're not going to do this for. And the overwhelming feeling of the board was, you're right, this is that barometer that we like to look at, only seeing dollar amounts, and if it's in the $100,000, $200,000 range, we need to dig a little bit more and look at what you're spending your money on. I somewhat jokingly, but somewhat nodded to Mike saying, nice job, because we avoided some legal costs this year.
Well,
but
we
it's
didn't just
the
avoid
barometer.
them. We knew that we felt like we had overspent last year on legal fees for negotiations, so we actually structured negotiations differently this year so that we did a lot internally before the lawyers ever got here so we could reduce legal costs.
That's huge.
But if the board wants something different, I'm perfectly all right with that, but this was a direct.
But I just want to say, Bob, my concern is with the language of the policy. So if this is sufficient, these documents, I just don't feel that I'm doing what the policy says based on these 2 documents. Now, if we can change that language so that it aligns with this, then I would be more comfortable.
I would be perfectly comfortable with one of 2. Policy as written, what does the board want from me? Or does the board want a different policy, in which case I can work on another policy too? And I really am perfectly all right with either one of them, because I've got more detail than I need, I think.
I think we're
it's
probably
still gonna be
talking
tough to
about
get that in
changing that
between.
word review. I think the word review is what's making you uncomfortable.
And I'm also, there are 2 different motions, well, one of them's no motion, one of them's a motion, one of them's a legal expense summary, so I think number 3 on the agenda might capture, maybe doesn't have anything to do with policy 9305, it's just a legal expense summary that prior to 5 years ago we never did, but the board wanted. So there was no action. I state the policy in my summary, maybe that's not even that accurate, I shouldn't state the policy. Policy, I think, references number 4, the approved list of legal firms, might be more accurate to the policy. But again, that's just a list, that's even less, it's just a list, what we access.
No, it's not up to our discretion to approve or not approve legal firms, is it?
It is on number 4.
No, but I mean, that's a job that the board ought to be undertaking every year.
And so we ought to be approving the list. The question is, it goes to, I think, Trish's concern that we don't know enough to be making that decision.
I think we know enough to be approving the list. I think the concern has to do with the annual review. Right? If you look at like what Bob said before, legal expense is a pretty small expense. I mean, we don't review individually every food vendor that we spend more than this in one bill that I see to come through the audit. We don't review individually every outside service we use for snow removal or yard care or anything else. We've got millions of dollars of expenses of things that we don't review what their hourly rate is, or what administration does.
I recall the context of this one there was I think it was like $150,000 for that particular time period, and suddenly there was money to cover that we didn't know about.
Well, and we
weren't
didn't know it
aware
was that
of.
big until the end of the
Exactly.
year.
So-
And so that's why we like the quarterly. So if we see there's an issue, it sparks us to ask a question. Hey, is there something going on in special ed that we need to know about because we're really high? And it just
Right,
causes
because
us
with
to
that-
ask the right questions.
With that music thing, there was all these meetings going on behind the scenes with Boardman and Clark at the time, and blah blah blah. So it kind of snuck up on everybody,
Right.
and I think this was an attempt to get ahead of that.
And I just want to add to that, a couple of years ago, well, 2 years ago, when I came on the school board, and I had a question about one of the law firms that were on here, because that law firm also represented different organizations within the city here, and we had a situation in the community where would there be any kind of conflict of interest, because this involved a couple of particular students and our law enforcement. And so I had asked and raised a question during, I want to say around this time, when we were approving. So I just felt compelled to share that too, that we're approving, but when do we have the opportunity to reject at the board level any of the law firms that are recommended to all of us?
Seems to me that our responsibility, it's the administration's responsibility to handle this in a responsible manner. And if there are issues, as came up with the large expenditure or with your concern, that there should be some way to bring those to the attention of the board, and that would be the function of administration and responsibility, their responsibility. So if it means a wording change in the policy, I'm comfortable with a single word change, but I don't think I want more than this.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I think it's a little bit confusing just because they both came tonight, one followed by the other. But that legal expenses for the fourth quarter of 2017-18, that really is sort of independent from this approval of the list of the law firms, because it doesn't really.
Well, and the legal expenses tells us much more than the next one is just a list.
Right,
That
but the
was what
legal
raised the
expenses
concern. You want me to
doesn't
approve
tell
a
you.
list, that's different than an annual review. That's very different.
But the legal expenses doesn't really tell you anything good or bad about any of the individual law firms, nor was it ever intended to do that. It's not meant to supplement the list of law firms. But, and answering Mary, your question about would the board ever have the opportunity to reject a certain law firm? Yeah, that's what this is. That's what this motion is the board could say, no, we're not going to use that one law firm.
Or
Correct.
we can request a different lawyer in a law firm.
Although that's difficult to do with the process we have laid out here
Yeah.
because root awareness.
Well, it's on a case-by-case
Right.
basis.
And I will say regarding Mary's comments about the one law firm that was in question, that does come up, I don't want to say often, but we take free legal payment from our liability carrier as often as we can get it. And that was one of them where Aegis, our liability carrier, paid for and appointed an attorney to work on a very specific case. As a matter of fact, that's happening again right now, where we don't even select the law firm. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation trying to select it for them, and they said, no, we're paying the bill. We'll select the law firm to fight this case on your behalf, but also our behalf. So there will, from time to time, be firms that come up that we don't pay a bill to. And that was one of them that I just included because I knew they would come up because our liability wanted to use them a lot.
And I
The one that we're
remember
working on right now, I might put them on there again next year just in case that same thing happens.
And I remember you shared that 2 years ago too, so I felt more comfortable, and so I guess we do have a vetting process. But I just wanted to at least acknowledge that.
Well, and not to get into a whole thing, but with a concern like that, I mean, there are ethical rules for attorneys where they'd have to practice, make sure there's an ethical wall within the firm and people that worked on one thing don't ever work on another. So that to me would be less of a concern with their assurance. But I just want to just be very clear that my concern is the language, annual review. Approving a list is not a review.
So, am I hearing you'd like us to bring a draft of some language that accurately reflects the current process? Is that?
It seems like everybody that, from what I can tell,
we're-
likes the process, so I
Okay.
just don't think that the language reflects the process
Okay,
yet.
and so then let's, for the next.
9305 to PRL for
Yes,
next
please.
month.
Yeah,
Thank you.
with a recommended change of language.
Yeah, I think just needs to focus more on the fact of what we actually do, which is
Right.
approve the list of the law
Yes.
firms as opposed to we're doing an annual review of the law firms.
Thank you.
That's a good point.
All right, the next point of business is the approval of the list of law firms. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the attached list of law firms the board and the district shall access for legal services deemed necessary by the superintendent of schools or his or her designee. So we need a first and a second to open the question.
Second.
I just have one question. Is that Von Briesen, is that a new one, or has that been on there before? I just, that one
Been on
doesn't
there
look
before,
familiar
that
to
was
me.
actually
That's
part of
actually
the
the
question.
one
It used to
from
be,
It changed. It
I
purchased.
forget their name, a lot of different partners from throughout Wisconsin.
Okay, I'm
joined
just
them.
curious. I didn't also
I
know.
can't think of the name, but it's one that Aegis likes to use. I can't recall since I've been here hiring them on our own. They've always been hired to defend us, and the bill is always paid by Aegis, our liability carrier. So they're one that I don't think since I've been here we've ever paid a bill to them.
Just, to follow up on that, Bob, so essentially our carrier often dictates or at least strongly recommends a certain law firm, and the law firms all have to previously have been on our list. No.
No,
So,
a legal situation could come up today. And if I sense that there's going to be a liability claim, I'll call our liability carrier right away. And it's called a pre-claim ticket. I'll make a pre-claim ticket. And I'll say, I sense this could turn into something. Let's start a ticket just in case. Sometimes it doesn't develop. Most often it doesn't develop. When it does develop into something bigger, I'm glad I made the pre-claim ticket because Aegis, our insurance company, will assign an appropriate attorney to fight it on our behalf. It's happening right now with a law firm that's not on this list. Because it just comes up and they assign and we say, you sure you don't want to use this one? We work with them a little bit more often. No, we haven't vetted them on our end, so I understand where they're coming from because they have a process and they choose from a variety of firms based on the specialty and the topic.
So we hire them and they hire, so
we
we're
don't
not
hire them, we
directly
pay
hiring this
premiums.
attorney.
Yeah, we just
In
pay.
in
Big
those,
premiums,
those
so we don't
cases
have-
that involve
Well,
an
it's their
insurer.
risk, so they make the call.
Right.
Shared risk, but yes, they are certainly in on it. Risk.
So there's other sorts of cases that we actually use this list for
Yes.
than those that are insurance. Okay. Okay. All right, any additional questions or comments? All right, then I will move it to a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
I just lost the word.
Abstention.
Abstentions.
You were gone for too long.
I'm not speaking English the whole time, so
Jeff,
abstentions.
if I may articulate my no, it's because
Sure.
this is outside the scope of policy 9305.
Okay.
This is, I don't see approving the list in 9305, so for that reason, I'm voting no.
Great.
If we want that recorded in the minutes, then we need to do a roll call.
Well, if you're requesting to have that recorded in the
Yes,
minutes.
please.
Okay.
Beth Martin,
Yes.
Pat McKee,
Yes.
Jane Rush,
Yes.
Mary Tao,
Yes.
Lance Trollope,
Yes.
Lee Webster,
Yes.
Tricia Zunker,
No.
Jeff Lee.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the next item of business is to set the annual meeting date and location. And so I'm looking for a motion to approve Monday, September 24th, 2018 as the date for the 2018-2019 budget hearing and annual meeting. The meeting will be held at 6 o'clock in the Nicholson Boardroom at the Longfellow Administration Center, beginning with the budget hearing followed by the annual meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All right, let's, who was to, do we have any presentation on that?
Yeah, it's wrapped into one presentation. There are 4 different agenda items up here, and that's the first one that you already picked off. And this is our budget calendar, and you've seen a lot of the budget already, and that's the motion that is in front of us right now. Setting that date, which last year at the annual meeting, the electorate that showed up voted for you to be able to do that. So whoever from the electorate showed up a year ago said, board, pick a date between this date and this date that is statutorily required. So they're giving you this authority.
Okay, any questions or comment? Then we'll take it to a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. The next issue is the shared equalization value estimates. And prior to October 1st, only equalized valuations from municipalities are available. In order to project property value changes by school district, an assumption must be made that all property values in any given municipality change in a uniform manner. With this assumption, the district property value is projected to increase by 4.02% for 2018-19 mill rate calculation purposes. Certified property value will not be available until October 1st. The given projected property value will be used for the initial budget and during the annual meeting. Bob, do you have anything further?
Sure. In fact, for every one of these, I have a slide or two prepared. And most of what we're doing tonight is the board approval for what goes in the newspaper, the board approval for what gets noticed to talk about at the annual meeting. So you'll get a committee crack at it tonight. You'll get a full board crack at it next. Then it'll go in the newspaper the day after or shortly thereafter, telling our entire community, show up for the annual meeting. And here's your chance to participate in democracy and vote in favor of the mill rate and the tax, and then you get the final say anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So equalization values are pretty important. And I think it's worth noting that the Department of Revenue statewide tries to develop a common measuring stick to decide on what the property value is here in Ashland, in Milwaukee, Kenosha, everywhere. And they make that determination. We have no say in that. And they also tell us inside of our district there are 9 municipalities. They tell us what percentage of our tax levy goes to each one of those municipalities. If the city of Wausau represents 59% of our district, they get 59% of our tax levy. So this governing body has no control, really, over whether somebody's individual taxes go up or down, or an individual municipality's taxes go up or down. This governing body determines tax amount. The pure tax levy, $42 million in tax levy. The Department of Revenue says City of Wausau gets 60% of it, Town of Ramon gets 12% of it, and so forth. Then the township, based on their own individual tax assessment practices, will split up. Joe on 12th Street gets this amount, Best Buy gets this amount, and you don't have control over that either. So a lot of times, I like to tell you this because you'll get an angry taxpayer that will suggest, my brother-in-law's taxes went up in the town of Statina, my taxes are going down, and he's mad at me. Well, you have no control over that. You as a governing board has control over the tax levy amount. That's important to understand. Statewide, the taxes or the property value went up 4%. So if you think about it this way, the property value is how the tax allocation gets spread. And if the property value goes up 4%, it gets spread a little bit more thinly. And in the Wausau School District, it went up 4.02%. At least that's our projection. We won't know that until October. Here are the estimates Wausau makes up about 60% of our district. Rib Mountain makes up about 20%. Brokaw, very erratic property value in Brokaw if you've been paying attention. But it doesn't really affect what's going on district-wide because it's only about 1/4%. DOR makes the call on every one of those, Department of Revenue. This governing body makes the call on the dollar amounts that we levy. Dollar amount for the general fund, we're projecting this amount. Dollar amount for all debt service, we're projecting that amount. Community service, this is just these two added together. Community service, that's the amount. That's what this governing body controls. The Department of Revenue says how it's split up. Each township says how it's split up further, or city. And again, no action required on this one. This is just our estimate. We are told that the city of Wausau is going up 3.87. We know that we control, or we have in our district, 95% of the city of Wausau. We don't know at this point if all the growth is happening in the 5% part that's not in our district, or the 95% part that's in our district. We don't get that information yet. We get that information in the middle of October. So right now we have to make an assumption that the entire city of Wausau, evenly distributed, went up at 3.87%. We've been pretty close on this the last few years, so our call is 4.02. Doesn't matter for the budget, doesn't matter for the levy. The only thing it matters for is the mill rate. So it doesn't matter until you start talking about equalized mill rate. Here's the next item on the agenda, if you want me to keep going, President Lee.
Sure, I've been introducing the items for a vote in order, for a first and a second in order to be able to open them.
We have.
Do you want to, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I have the actual motion on a slide.
Sure.
That you'll be
sure.
able to see when I get done with maybe some preliminary information. Would that work? And then you'll have the action sheet in front of you. The motion will be on the slide if that helps.
If that's fine with everyone.
Sure.
Okay.
So the recommended 18-19 budget, much of this you saw going back all the way to November. So we don't show up in August and spring the budget on you. We talk about the budget in November, we build our assumptions, we show it to you gradually. Now it gets to be a little bit more formal. Board taking action on certain things. Tonight you're just taking action on what shows up in the paper and what we present at the annual meeting. Since 1993, there's been a revenue limit. This interplay between these three variables, or these three quantities, is extremely important. The levy amount and the state aid together are governed by the revenue limit. If the revenue limit goes down, one of these, or perhaps both of them, could go down. If the revenue limit goes down and there's no more state aid available, the levy amount goes down. In our case this year, the revenue limit's going down, the state aid is going up. So if you think about what that does to your levy amount, revenue limit going down, you think taxes go down. Aid going up, another reason for taxes going down. Our general fund tax is going to go way down this year. So if there's any good news in this, there's probably some good news for the taxpayer. Okay, the taxpayer is going to see their general fund levy go down. The revenue in this manner represents about 85 to 90% of our entire revenue. Outside of that, we earn some money on investments, and we collect money on fees, and we get grants, probably the largest one outside of the revenue limit, but most of our money is governed by the revenue limit. This is a visual for what has happened to the revenue limit per pupil since 2006-07. It was indexed on inflation, 257 for every student. It went up 257. Then for every student it went up 264. Then it went up 275. Then they picked a flat amount for the next biennium. Went up 200, went up 200. And then you remember what happened here. Okay, that was Act 10. And the revenue limit went down $578. And along with it came the now infamous tools. And the biggest tool that the governor and the administration provided at that time was take away the district portion of the WRS contribution to retirement. But the savings for eliminating the WRS requirement wasn't as big as the decrease in revenue limit. So we had to capture savings elsewhere. So we captured the savings that were mandatory, take away the employer contribution to the WRS, but at the same time, you might recall there were some salary freezes. So There were salary freezes. We happen to benefit from another 0% increase in our health insurance. We did some other things to get away with it, but the revenue limit went down dramatically all in 1 year. After that, went up 50, went up 75, 75, hasn't gone up since. In place of that, in recent years, is a per pupil categorical aid that started to be added. About the same time, $50, $25, $75, about $650 in all. And you can see what's happening. These increases are being replaced by these increases. And if you hear debate going on statewide, that's the difference between equalized funding and foundational funding. Equalized funding suggests there's a method, and we can argue about its efficacy, but there's a method for directing more money to districts that need it. And they do it with property value. And they do it with amount of spending. You've heard me say before, you spend more, you get more in aid. Okay, that's only through the equalization aid formula. And if you're wealthier, you get less aid. Now, it's not affecting us as much as some of these rural communities where farmland is going through the roof. And you think about Western Marathon and Clark County, where the property value is going up and corporate farms are coming in and maybe student population is going down. And wealth is determined by property value per student. So property value is going up and you have less students. You can see what's happening in Clark County. Those districts look pretty wealthy. And if they look pretty wealthy, the equalized part gives you less and less money. Now the foundational part just runs through number of kids. If you have 1,000 kids, you get $200 per kid. And that actually has helped us recently because when it goes through the equalization funding formula and the revenue limit formula, there's a 3-year rolling average and there's declining enrollment exemptions and some of these things have kind of helped us and now they're not helping us so much anymore. The foundational, that was money you got right away. And we were pretty grateful about that about this time last year, I remember. In fact, we added some things to our budget because of the foundational funding of $200 per student. And I remember last summer rejoicing when we were getting $204 per student the following year. But it's a fundamental difference in giving money to everybody, and you might say Southeast Wisconsin's in favor of this, some of the wealthy suburban Milwaukee districts in particular, and it's moving away from this. And depending on how long this continues, there is at least talk of lawsuits that are challenging this. We'll see if that develops. So this slide is very revealing. This slide just captures what the other slide showed in a little bit different way. Prior to Act 10, increases. Note that the scale isn't zeroed at 11,000, so it might look a little bit steeper than it is, right? But prior to Act 10, pretty steep increase. After Act 10, revenue limits are the darker color, the per pupil is the lighter color. And if we start putting in annualized increases, that was a 2.86% increase over that time. And prior to that, it was about the same. So I could go back to 2000, I could actually go back to 1993. It's probably not much different. Prior to Act 10, 2.86% annualized growth, 5.27% reduction. That's in the per pupil amount from 1011 to 1112. And we could save some money by the WRS change, but we didn't save enough to take away from the revenue that we lost. And then what has happened since then? The visual says it all, but the number says it as well, 1.33% annualized growth. So if somebody tells you in a survey, I'm not happy with the salary increases I've been getting since 2011. I liked my salary increases in 2007 and 8 much better. And maybe even 1991, 92 before revenue limits, even better yet. So it doesn't come as a surprise if you ask people, what do you think about your salary increases now compared to back in the good old days? There's no revenue to go around. Think about 1.33% over time versus 2.86% over time, all the while trying to recover from 6.5% of your salary, take home at least, being taken away from the WRS contribution. So it doesn't come as a surprise that people are upset with the salary structure, or upset with alternative compensation, or upset with how much money they're taking home. And I'm here to say over and over again, it's not our fault. It's not your fault. And we do everything we can to change the people that make decisions in Madison's mind but sometimes to limited success. That graph right there says it all. In fact, I'll superimpose it on this one as well. There's the graph you just saw. Here are 5 different measures. One of them is the CPI, dark blue, over the course of the last 5 years. This is limited revenue. That's if we take our per pupil categorical aid and we take our revenue limit and we remove the voucher payments, because we know that's just $600,000 that passes through our hands and we don't even get to get attached to it. We send it to Madison to be spent in the vouchers. And the energy efficiency, which is part of our revenue limit, can't really be included either, because that has a specific purpose. We tax for it, we spend it on energy efficiency projects. So we have to take those off of the revenue limit. So if we do that, here's the limited revenue over time, and then 3 different employee groups: teachers, non-certified, which are custodians, clericals, paras, food service, non-certified, teachers and administrators. And these were exactly equal to CPI, I believe. And these were a little bit bigger than CPI, but less than revenue. Here they were greater than both, here greater than both. And here was a trend that started in 17-18, where teachers got a little bit more than non-certs and administrators. And that trend continues. Teachers, non-certs, administrators. Those are the percent increases for salary that we've budgeted.
I just want to make one point, Bob, on a comment you made just a few minutes ago, that when people complain about their raises, you can see that it's not your fault, our fault, whomever. I just want to point out that the number of complaints that I have received in the last 24 months relative to dollar amount are far fewer than the number of complaints I receive from staff regarding the process to achieve the dollar amount.
Okay.
To me, there are 2 very, very different issues. People are like, yeah, I get it, dollars are limited over here, but it's the process that we're really frustrated with this alt-comp model. I just want to make sure that we're separating those 2.
Point well taken. I guess I was talking about the survey we put out, but you get your phone calls, so you get to dig a little bit deeper.
Yep.
So.
Good point.
This next graph is pretty much the same thing. It's the same data in a little bit different format. You see this in the financial world a lot. What's your $1,000 investment do over time? Well, this is $1,000, and if that $1,000 were to track to the CPI, that's the blue, which if our salaries tracked exactly with the CPI, you didn't get a raise at all, right? Because the cost of everything you had to buy goes up. And then the next one is revenue. And then the next one, you'll see them all on top of each other because admins, non-certs, and teachers got the same up until this point. And then they start to separate a little bit. And then you'll see the admins on the bottom, the non-certs, and the teachers on top. This just shows that that growth of $1,000 over time does outpace the CPI, and it does outpace the available revenue. And teachers are starting to outpace non-certs, and non-certs outpacing admins. Now, those are averages. We know from recent conversations that there were some teachers who were getting perhaps as big as $12,000 increases or more. And that opportunity doesn't exist for the non-certs. And the opportunity doesn't exist really for administrators either. Now, of course, they have 12,000 and still have that average. There are some smaller teacher raises as well. This year, I think the small teacher raise was 1.4 or 1.9 or something like that. Was the smallest teacher raise. But this all builds into the budget, and I'm spending so much time on it because there's such a large chunk of our budget that deals with salary. Here's a big chunk of our benefits, the health insurance benefit. Exponential growth really helps you when you're investing money. It really kills you when you're exposed to expenses. The medical trend from 2009-10, this would be our health premium for our network choice, $21,000. If exposed to medical trend, it more than doubles in that time. An 8% increase over about 8 years, I think is about 7.5 years it takes to double. So it doubled if it would have followed trend. Now, it didn't follow trend. It stayed 0 for 7 years, and this is the first year since I've been here at least that we're increasing it. It's 4%, and another 4% we're pulling from fund balance, so we're diluting it a little bit because trend is 8, so anything less than 8 I guess is a win. Medical is up on top. Dental is almost a non-factor. We can't completely ignore it, but that stayed 0 for an 8th year. Now that change between the trend and what actually happened was an opportunity that we took advantage of. And we probably would have had to change our benefit plan if not for those zeros. Increased deductible, maybe increased premium contribution, maybe different pharmacy card, things like that. During that time, we made actually some plan improvements. Most notably, the choice between a high deductible plan and a regular network choice plan. I think another plan improvement would have been our incentive for wellness. Our incentive for wellness when this all started, I think, was $0. And now it's $800 per family or $400 per single.
What is the percentage of people who have chosen to go on the high deductible health insurance plan?
Quarter? A third of the people? Salary wage increases beyond the available revenue, which you saw on previous slides, that's made possible by a huge cost like this staying in check for a long amount of time. This was really a godsend when it came to building the budget for many, many years. Protected programming, you didn't see a lot of programming reduced during that time. Here's the actual motion and what you need to approve to go into the newspaper. Last year, we had expenses that exceeded revenue because of our scoreboard project. So we overspent our revenue because we were going to pull from fund balance, build a scoreboard, generate revenue, which is going very well right now. This year, they match exactly. So maybe the increase is best measured here, 2.44%. The revenue going up because this expense was overinflated last year because of that scoreboard project. So our general fund budget up about 2.44. Total revenue limit, like I said earlier, revenue limit went down. Most notably, we're losing some of these exemptions. The declining enrollment exemption, losing a little bit of transfer of service exemption. We're losing some exemptions, a hold harmless exemption. So our revenue limit going down, our aid went up quite a bit. And part of that was what the state did, and they made the entire appropriation a little bit bigger. Probably more so, we spent more. If you remember last year, we spent money in Fund 39 to defease debt. We prepaid debt. And you've heard from me before already tonight, actually, you spend more, you get more aid. It's not a good enough reason to spend more, but it takes the sting out of it, I say. We spent a lot in the last budget, so we get more aid in the next budget. That's the state's way of saying you have a higher shared cost, so we're going to give you more. So if you consider these two things, the next slide, which talks about the levy, is going to be encouraging, right? Revenue limit went down. In fact, here's the relationship again. Revenue limit went down, aid went up. That makes the general fund levy go down. So there's a motion. If you want to read it's going to be redundant. It's going to be mostly stuff that I said already, but there's the motion.
Okay, so the motion is to recommend to the Board of Education a preliminary 2018-19 general fund budget of $102,959,777 for expenses and $102,959,777 for revenue for presentation at the annual meeting and budget hearing on September 24th, 2018. Do we have any further comment or questions? Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
We didn't get a first and second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Asking for a first.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
This is next on the agenda, number 8, is approving the tax levy to support the budget. We'll get some help from the electorate. In September, they'll come and they'll be able to vote on these same things, but you'll get the final say. You might recall that. I can't not show this slide as often as I'm alive, I think. This is our mill rate and what revenue limits in 1993 did to the mill rate and continue to do with the QEO. And keep in mind, in this stretch, we passed a $29 million referendum. We approved a $10 million Phase 1 energy efficiency project borrowing and another $9.99 million energy efficiency borrowing project. So that's $49 million in debt that we issued, and we kept the mill rate that flat, including decreasing for 3 years in a row. The motion's on the bottom to support the levy that's on top, but let me say a thing or two about it first. The general fund levy, as we mentioned a couple slides ago, is gonna go down. So our general fund levy is gonna go down about $2 million. Combination of revenue limit going down, equalization aid going up. Our debt service levy, which, asterisk number 1, includes about $2 million in phase 2 and 3 debt retirement for energy efficiency projects. So we get to increase our revenue a little bit to pay that. Okay, and you as a board made that decision 3 years ago and then again 2 years ago. The natural debt structure went up a little bit. Last year, you might recall, it was a little bit less than $2 million. Now it's a little bit more than $2 million. That was our way of stepping into the debt a little bit more gradually. So that amount, $15 million, includes $2 million in energy efficiency work. It also includes $6.5 million in defeasance. Remember what you did last year was about $3.2 million in defeasance. So our mill rate was gonna go down. We took a bunch of callable debt from the future and we bumped it up about $3.2 million. So this year, we knew this last year, we'd have to bring in another $3.2 million to defease, and that's before considering what our general fund was gonna go down. So we doubled it and defeased another $3 million in debt to include 6.525 callable defeasance, which means you're prepaying your home mortgage, if you want to think of it that way. And if you have the affordability to do this, and we're going to do it with our mill rate going down about 15 cents, but that's a projection. So if you have the affordability to do it, it's a smart move because we're saving taxpayers about $600,000. So some might think, well, you save $600,000, apply it to this, or you save $600,000, apply it to that. It doesn't work that way. It's just $600,000 over the next 5 years that we don't tax for because we have less debt. And in checking with our financial analysts, we have enough callable debt if we miss a referendum next year to do that again one more time and most likely 2 more times. Certainly 1 more time. In fact, I can say certainly 2 more times. 3 isn't a question. But if we think about a referendum in February and we quit defeasing, we'll have this opportunity where debt drops off. Why did debt drop off? Because of this, because you're proactive. And if we don't go to referendum until April 2020, it'll be dropped off then as well, because we'll prop it up 1 more year. Now, taxpayers, they like this and they don't like it. They say, just let the taxes drop. But when they are met with the $590,000 in savings in interest by prepaying it early and allowing the taxes to go down a little bit, that's usually palatable at that point. And again, the 15-cent decrease, that's a projection. 15 cents on the mill rate is $15 for a $100,000 home. That's a projection because we don't know exactly what our aid is yet until October certification, and we don't know what our property value is yet. Right? So those two can affect the mill rate yet. So the motion's on the bottom, and again, we're not setting the levy. We're asking for your authority to take this to the board and that authority to put it in the paper. Talk about it on the evening of the annual meeting.
So I'm looking for a motion to recommend to the Board of Education a projected tax levy of $45,289,591 for presentation at the annual meeting and budget hearing on September 24, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Any further comment? Questions?
Just one comment on just in case anybody's actually watching. In addition to tax savings with that defeasance, we've also made an effort since I've been on the board and prior to that to try to keep the mill rate fairly flat. To try to avoid having huge spikes or huge drops, because a taxpayer might think a huge drop is great, but that huge drop comes with a big spike later then. So if we have money or funding that we know we're going to need in the future, we try to keep it at a fairly steady rate so that you're not getting a big benefit or getting a big hit if you only happen to be in the district 1 year, 2 years, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, there's a graph or two in the budget book that shows that very clearly.
Yeah.
We created a great deal of stability in the mill rates.
I believe we call it fiscal responsibility.
This says it all, right here.
Mm-hmm.
Your
Yeah,
efforts.
that's what we're trying to avoid. You know, if you happen to live in the district that the year was really low, you're happy. But if you happen to live here for 2 years when it was at its highest point, you know, some of that spending benefits the district over the course of 50 years, and you're getting hit with it, and you're only here for 2 years in the community. It's just not fair.
That's the reason you move out of the community.
Right, exactly right.
Well, sure, and you can't, whether it's going up or down, it upsets your planning.
Right.
I mean, even if when it's in your favor, it alters your
Yep.
future plans. Stability is good for business. All right, so I'll call the question then. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. A request.
Can I-
Go ahead.
Sorry to
Sure.
go one more time, but I can't not thank Noel Tortzen and Janet Tusen in public. I thank them upstairs.
put that on
Noel
your
is
slide.
here. There's a reminder on the screen so I wouldn't forget. What Noel does for this budget book, is 10 times what I do. And Janet's right there with him every step of the way. And last week I had to be gone for a couple days. Well, I didn't have to be gone. I chose to be gone a couple days. And what they were able to do to pull this all together on time to get it in the board book and everything to do for months and months. It's just worth noting, so thank you.
And I think, as you pointed out, just because school is out for the year doesn't mean everybody gets to go home. There are plenty of people that work year-round.
Nolan, I don't think Janet's here. And look around behind people. But yes, thank you from the board as well. Okay, so the next, I will seek a motion to enter into closed session, and that will require a roll call vote.
So
Need a
moving.
first.
Second. Jan said so moved.
Beth Martin,
Yes.
Pat McKee,
Yes.
Jane Roosh,
Yes.
Mary Powell,
Yes.
Lance Trowell,
Yes.
Lee Webster,
Yes.
Tricia Zunker,
Yes.
Jeff Lee.
Yes.
Thank you.